Letby issue case. I'm just doing a voiceover instead because I don't know if I can hear that audio with the wind. But I was just thinking when I was on the beach about the leak that Peter Elston wrote about, about the other babies that weren't on the indictment, and the fact that Ben Myers asked for he only really asked in the end for two details on two babies, and the details on the matrix that was used, or the matrix and flow chart regarding those babies, or matrix scores, and how they were left out of the indictment. And he was denied this by Goss and the prosecution, and the reasoning went along the lines of the prosecution claimed that they didn't use that matrix in the case against Lucy, in prosecuting Lucy, so therefore the defence wasn't entitled to disclosure, just because the prosecution didn't use it, right? So that was the reasoning, and that's what Goss ruled in the end, that, there was no entitlement under... So Goss used the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act 1996, and he cited Section 8, but before that there's Section 7A to give the relevance here. So Section 7A, continuing duty of prosecutor to disclose. Under number 2, the prosecutor must keep under review the question whether at any given time, and in particular following the giving of a defence statement, there is prosecution material which A, might reasonably be considered capable of undermining the case for the prosecution against the accused, or of assisting the case for the accused, and B, has not been disclosed to the accused. So Section 8 then defines what prosecution material is. So for the purposes of this section, so 8.3, for the purposes of this section, prosecution material is material A, which is in the prosecutor's possession and came into his possession in connection with the case for the prosecution against the accused. B, which in pursuance of a code operative under Part 2, he has inspected in connection with the case for the prosecution against the accused. Or C, which falls into subsection 4. And subsection 4 says material falls within this subsection if in pursuance of a code operative under Part 2, the prosecutor must, if he asks for the material, be given a copy of it or be allowed to inspect it in connection with the case for the prosecution against the accused. Now, the code operative under Part 2 that's mentioned there, I looked up, and that is actually that's the Criminal Procedure and Investigations Act, Section 23(1) Code of Practice. I could put a link to that, you can read it. I can't go through it, it's too long, but I did look at Section 10, which is about disclosure. But basically, this is boiling down to the definition of what they call prosecution material. And what I want to point out here is that the issue with this is that what they're doing is it basically says that prosecution material is material which the prosecution is using in the case against the accused, right? Now, remember, so this they're now talking about only material that would be used to prosecute Lucy. So anything that would have been looked at when Lucy supposedly wasn't a suspect, but we know she was from day one, but let's just pretend she wasn't like they are, right? So any of that material where they're pretending that Lucy wasn't a suspect, i.e. they're just investigating the incident, whether there were murders, anybody else that could have done it, all that material that was gathered is not allowed to the defence because it wasn't in the particular case against Lucy. Now, and that's what the prosecution can then argue. So we can clearly see the problem against this. With this, if you define prosecution material that way, then you're really limiting, and I think this is a real problem anyway, if that is the case, then that really limits the defence in what can be disclosed to them. and they're reliant on the prosecution with disclosure, which is a little bit ridiculous anyway. I mean, the defence should have far more rights in terms of obtaining materials, particularly from the NHS, because if they're just going to disclose everything to prosecution, which suits their purposes, that skews the case right from the beginning. So you've also got the fact that the investigators and the disclosure officers, the prosecution are getting material from them, so they could argue that they hadn't been given material and therefore it wasn't used in the prosecution. I mean, it's... Anyway, and so Goss mentioned that, you know, he said in the reasoning that the prosecution response is that the case review flowchart or the matrix was a tool that was introduced as part of the review after the defendant had been identified by the inquiry as the perpetrator for the offences on which she is being tried. In other words, it was not used in the course of this case and is irrelevant. You see, so what they're using is, okay, well, you know, this matrix didn't sort of turn up till after we'd decided that Lucy was guilty, basically. She's identified as the perpetrator, so she's charged guilty, done and dusted, so we don't have to bother about anything which might show that maybe murders didn't happen in the first place and she shouldn't have been. You know, it's circular reasoning that they use. Okay, they're using the circular reason. Lucy's charged, and therefore we only need to use material which relates to... which has come along after she's been charged in order to charge her. So if anything else turns up which might show that she shouldn't have been charged in the first place, that is irrelevant. And that's the argument using. But it doesn't really fit. The problem is how they define prosecution material, okay? And this is the issue, I'm thinking. It needs to be redefined. Ben Myers was blocked from getting information which could be crucial in showing that one of the parameters that was used in order to pick which babies they were going to prosecute for was Lucy's presence, which is entirely ridiculous. But, so, and he wanted to know whether, you know, what reasoning was in keeping those non-indictment babies out. I have no idea why, and Peter Elston was saying he's got no idea why he picked just two babies out of all those, but there must have been a reason in the end. But anyway, so I just got a little analogy. Jack was working in a sofa warehouse. One day, management noticed that 5 sofas had gone missing out of about 100 that had been in the warehouse at the time. Management had not expected these 5 sofas to go missing, and they called Jack into their office to ask whether he knew what might have happened to the sofas. Jack, 5 sofas have gone missing, and you were the only one working in the warehouse at the time. Jack, what have you got to say? Oh, have you checked if any sofas have been sold, manager? Of course there were no sofas sold, Jack. Linda, have you checked the orders? Yes, I've checked them, sir. There was no online orders. Did you hear that, Jack? No online orders. However, there were the way that sofa warehouse was worked. Orders came through in other ways by post. People also came directly into the warehouse because it was also a shop to buy things. They also ordered by phones. But management didn't check that. They only checked the online orders and found that no 5 sofas hadn't been ordered online. Jack usually walked home from work. He didn't have a car, or he caught the bus. But management assumed that he must have gone home and then picked up a lorry and come back and stolen the sofas. Jack also happened to be having an affair with a married woman, and this woman, she had the police actually they managed to get into her house under some kind of false pretenses, and they found that she had a sofa And they thought, well, that's it, she likes sofas, so Jack must have been stealing the sofas because his girlfriend likes sofas. And also they did go into Jack's house. They got a warrant to search Jack's house, and they also discovered that Jack had a sofa in his house, and they thought, well, that proves that Jack really likes sofas. And also they found on Jack's internet search history that he'd once, I think it was 10 years beforehand, he'd looked up sofas online, to buy a sofa. So they thought, well, he must be really interested in sofas. So that was it, really. There was, of course, when Jack was working, he was the only one, but it didn't matter that there were cleaners coming in and out, and also members of the public were coming in and out. They don't steal sofas. People like that don't steal sofas. The only people that steal sofas are people who work with sofas. Yeah, so that was all sorted, and the police came in and arrested him, and it was taken to court. And then the defence did ask for the data on all the order data. So they wanted the order data which related to postal orders, in-person orders and telephone orders, to see if the sofas had been sold that way. But that wasn't allowed because the prosecution said that they didn't use that. In when they prosecuted Jack, they only used the online orders, so that wasn't allowed. So Jack was found guilty, quite rightly so, and the judge ordered him to serve 5 life sentences to run concurrently, 1 for each sofa. He decided to make an example of him because apparently sofa theft was becoming more common. The whole thing is farcical, and they know it, and I don't believe that the judge is that Goss was that stupid that he couldn't see the relevance.
Don't drag it.
And also, but it just seems to me that the argument is that we decide as the prosecution what we're going to use, and you, the defence, can only have disclosure of exactly the same sort of what we decide, which starts a case off with a total imbalance, because if only the prosecution can decide what's relevant, then it just skews the whole case. And in terms of what can be disclosed, okay, to the problem with NHS data as well, because they can withhold so much. I mean, there's a lot that's confidential and they can easily withhold things. So the defence need to have a lot more access to information from the NHS, should they need it, especially when someone's accused of such serious crimes. They really should be able to access anything they want, because stuff can be pseudo-anonymised. Because they would have known that it was crucial, absolutely crucial, to establish that where was the unexpected coming from, and why did we pick these particular papers, and also arbitrary dates, because Lucy was working in the hospital prior to that. So why the arbitrary dates? First of all, we shouldn't be picking dates just because Lucy's there anyway, obviously, but why the dates that they picked? Because incidents happened before that time, so arbitrary dates, of course that was necessary in court. It was necessary to ascertain that.